Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. If you like the show, please rate and review it on the platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us and grow the show. And of course, you can learn more about Flute New Music Consortium at flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Today's guest is beloved composer Alex Shapiro, who has built an unconventional life interweaving her dynamic musical career with avid pursuits of wildlife photography, nonfiction writing, and a devotion to advocacy. Published by Activist Music LLC, her works are heard daily in concerts and broadcasts and can be found on over 30 commercially released recordings from around the world. Alex lives in Washington State's remote San Juan Island, and when she's not composing, she can be found communing with the sea life as seen on her music and photo-filled blog, notesfromthekelp.com, and her website, alexshapiro.org. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to talk to you guys. This is really fun.
I met you, and you remembered the date, and I didn't, years ago when you came to University of Wyoming and did, I don't know, week-long or several-day residency. When was that?
It probably felt like a month. That was, I have to look at my dates. I want to say 2015-ish, but I would have to look at the dates at this point. But yeah, I had such a great time because, and I know that she was not too long ago on your podcast. Anne Goodso is amazing. I adore this woman, and she had invited me out, and we had a great time. I worked with the chamber musicians, the band, Bob Belser, everybody. It was a delight. And it was great.
Yeah. And you had so much music, you had so many different genres, that everybody really got some focused and very valuable attention from you. I remember you were very generous with your time and your energy in the days that you were with us. You do a lot of these too. So I wanted to start out by asking you, what do you get out of these guest residencies? I mean, you made it look effortless, but when I think about it, it seems like it must have been so exhausting.
Well, I think it's interesting. That's a great question. And no one's ever asked me that question, by the way. This is a great question. It is exhausting, but in the most wonderful way. And every time I do a residency, by the way, which is basically for anybody listening, that can be anywhere between 1 and 5 days, usually, at a university. Sometimes a high school. I've got a high school one coming up in February, which is sometimes I do those. Those are fun. But usually you're just suddenly immersed in this other world that is really quite joyous and wonderful, and you get to engage and interact with all these open spirits who are excited to share music the same way you're excited to share music. And that's just such a beautiful thing. And every time I do it, I'll tell you, Nicole, every time I do it, I think to myself, wow, I'm exhausted after doing this for like 3 days straight. And it's a very long day. Every day tends to be very long, right? And I think immediately about all of my friends and colleagues who teach on a daily basis for X number of months a year, right? All you get is the summers off. But other than that, you go to school, you have to be on, as I would like to say, on, your best self and your public self every day in front of all those students. And I have to tell you, that is, to me, very, it takes a lot of energy. It is a wonderful thing. I'm one of these introverted extroverts or extroverted introverts. I'm not sure which, but I'm somebody who can absolutely be completely whole hog, really, 110%. And then when I get back into the confines of my studio or my house, it's like, I just basically crawl up into a fetal position, and I just love being alone. Some people are just on all the time and they feed off of that. And others have a hard time being on at all. And we all know people like that for whom it's kind of painful to have to be with people for so long, and I understand that. For me, I get completely energized from it, not only from just the energy of human contact, because hey, let's face it, I live on a remote island in the middle of nowhere, right? So I'm not in a city. I don't get a lot of human contact except with my wonderful husband and friends, on the island. But if I'm not traveling, I'm fairly hermetic and working here. But the other thing that's much more meaningful than that, because that's what I get out of it. But I think the biggest thing is that exchange of ideas and enthrallment and passion that we share, whether you're doing it hopefully every day, teaching, or whether you're doing it as I do as a guest, I jokingly call myself the grandparent that comes in, plays with the kids, has a great time with them, and then hands them back. It's like, here, they're yours. I don't have to deal with them full time like a parent, which also explains why I don't have children. I have cats. That's about all I can deal with. But I think that's what I get out of it, is all of that energy that flows back and forth, if you're having a good time. I have noticed that the schools that are not the quote unquote Ivy League schools, I tend to have a better time at, because the students are that much more engaged. I'm being very frank here. And a lot of people have said this too, maybe not on your show, but I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I don't think it's a secret that sometimes there really is a difference in how people respond to a visiting guest of any kind, whether when they're in Wyoming, or maybe they're in New Haven or Cambridge, and other places. There is a different vibe. And so, yeah, that time at Wyoming was great. I loved it.
Did you know Ann Gutso before you did the residency in Wyoming?
We did know each other from another residency I had done at Colorado, where I was semi-resident, semi-guest speaker for ASCAP, doing a music workshop, a music business workshop for them. And I believe Anne was there. I hope, if Anne's listening, Anne, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Dial me up and we'll edit this. We'll edit this part. But anyway, I think that's where we first met, like a year before or something, a year or two before. And she was just, she's so great. And so that spark was lit. And we also became wonderful friends. And she and Bonnie have been out to the island a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, I think. And I've been out there with them in the Grand Tetons for their incredible series that they do out there in the summers. So it's been beautiful. Everything is connected to everything else. Nothing that we do in life is a one-off usually. That the way you connect with people, assuming it goes well, it's indelible. And I love that about our business. It's a really small world, right? I mean, you guys know this as players, as writers, anything. Are you both composers as well as musicians?
No.
Just
No?
big fans.
Okay. All right. But it's such a small world, I find. And so when you meet somebody in one context, all of a sudden you're still in touch with them in a lot of different ways as the years go by.
I have my own thoughts about what the flute culture is to me. All of my closest friends really are flute players, and I always loved that camaraderie that I had in school with my flute studios. But I think that was partly my teachers not putting up with us being jerks to each other, I realize now. So for me, the flute community is great in general. What do you think? This is your personal experience, but what do you think of the composer community? Sometimes from the outside, it can feel a little bit bro culture-y. Is that off?
Especially in the wind band world, right?
Yeah.
Or the brass world, or other bro worlds. My experience has been really, really positive, and that.
Good.
And again, nobody can speak for everybody, right? My personal experience in the composer world and the composer community has been nothing but unbelievably warm, fuzzy, and supportive. And I've been involved not only as a composer, but as an advocate, and somebody who's, really trying to help anybody else as much as I can through the experiences that I have and the I don't know, the interests that I have and the things I discover. If they'll help other people, I want to help them. My experience has been not the bro culture at all, other than, stereotypically you can make jokes about it, right? But in general, everybody, no matter what their gender, and there's so many to choose from, no matter where they're coming from, it's been incredibly supportive of each other. I think composers, maybe it's because we do work alone in usually fairly small rooms by ourselves, dressed God knows how, eating out of the peanut butter jar, at 2 a.m, stressed under deadlines. Those stereotypes are true, folks. They are true. And maybe it's because of that when you get us together, and we're so happy to talk to each other and share information. Either we're geeking out about tech stuff, or we're just geeking out about Mahler or whatever we want to geek out about. I have found it the most interconnective community among us. It's just great. I mean, when I was in LA for 24 years, And during that time, for 10 years, I hosted a private series called the Composer Salons, which was an offshoot of American Composers Forum, of which I was president at the time of the LA chapter. And so me and Kubi Uner, who is a wonderful composer who heads up the film music department at Columbia College in Chicago for the past 8 or 9 years now, and a wonderful woman who is no longer with us, Giovanna Imbesi. The three of us put together a series that went on for a very long time that gathered the composers in LA from all genres, pretty much, even a little bit of pop and rock, but not much. I mean, we did have Trent Reznor and some people like that, but most of the people were either film music people or concert music people or jazz people or completely outside of any genre people, which was fascinating. And LA has a huge new music scene, and that was, I think, such a lifeline for all of us. We'd usually have about 50 composers come. This is about 4 times a year. We would do these every year. And everybody, and it was not open to the public. It was only open to working composers. And it was a great example of how everybody crawls out of their cave. We sort of ooze out of our caves. Everybody's on deadline. Everybody's busy. These are all working professionals from every genre. And yet they come out of the woodwork to get together and spend an entire afternoon, and that bleeds into the evening, together, listening to each other's music, listening to 4 guests, who were kind of curated for the day, that I moderated, and would talk about their work. They would talk about their work and perform and show it. This was incredibly soulfully feeding, I think, for everybody. And it's an example to your point of what's the composer community like. I think we're a bit starved for each other's company and perspective. And we get it online to a large degree, of course, with social media. But it's really great. I mean, I just came from the Midwest Clinic, a week and a half ago in Chicago, which when I started going there in 2008, didn't have that many composers, and it was very bro culture. I'll tell you that. There weren't that many female composers. And now, throw a baton and you will hit a composer. It's fantastic. There are so many composers going to it. It's this, for those who don't know, it's this really, really big, about 17,000 crazed musicians show up. It's called every year, it's December in Chicago. That's how devoted they are, is they go to Chicago in the middle of December. Although we got a bonus round this year, it was 60 degrees. It was unbelievably warm. It was like in the 50s every day. I think it hit 60 one day. So it was crazy. So it was very pleasant to be there. But that, again, composers flock to each other, and we have dinners and, drinks and hanging out and this and that. And it's like everybody's just so happy to support each other's work and talk with each other.
I have a spouse who has caused me to be very familiar with the Midwest Clinic over the last decade or so. When do you think the shift started to happen? And do you have any idea maybe
The gender shift?
or the culture, the gender shift, the shift towards more composers?
Yeah, I think it happened, I would say about 10 years ago is when I really started noticing it. And then I'd say for the past, well, the pandemic's been a weird time because, Midwest was off for a couple of years basically or
Sure.
whatever. But I would say, including the pandemic weird time, I would say the past 8 years, we've been talking really forcibly, there's a word, forcibly about DEI issues, because the many worlds, not just the band world, but the orchestral world, many worlds are just very white and very male oriented and very this and very that, and they hadn't until more recently. It hadn't occurred to them to be inclusive and to look beyond what they already knew. And as I often say, I've done a lot of talking about these issues in the past, and for many different reasons. And I always like to think, and it really is true, I'd say 95% of the time, that most people are not, and most men in this case, are not intentionally discriminatory. They're not trying to block anybody out or keep anybody from progressing. The problem is they're just not trying, in many cases, to get out of their comfort zone and learn about other composers that they didn't know about, because it takes a little bit of effort and time. And if everybody's stressed, as everybody is, and doesn't have a lot of extra time to go searching for new composers of any background, you tend to grab the people you know. And as with all of us, the people we know tend to kind of look and hang out like us. They tend to be in our sphere. Like tends to attract like. I mean, I always say this, we are mammals. It's how it works, folks. But that doesn't mean we can't do better and we can't make more of an effort. And so what we often have been talking about is intentional programming, meaning do it with intention. Take a moment, take a beat to find out who are the talents out there that you haven't heard of. And it's so easy now because all you have to do is not only ask your friends and colleagues, but go online, onto Facebook or Insta or wherever you want to ask the question and just have people point you in the right direction. This has been very, very successful. We're still I mean, I'd say when I started going to Midwest, maybe 3% of the programs had women and people of color on them. I think this year we were up to maybe 12 or 13%, which is still better, but still not, quite where we need to be given how much, how many composers are out there, new composers. But that also brings up another issue, which a lot of people don't connect the dots between new music, contemporary music, and composers from diverse backgrounds. Because now that we're all coming up, now that in the past, 20, 30 years, really, we've all had equal opportunity because of the internet, largely. Hit a button, anybody can publish, anybody can, get your work out there. That's awesome. And so now that we all have that opportunity since the mid-90s, so we're talking literally 30 years, then the next step is, okay, especially with orchestras who tend to be a little bit slower on the draw than band world, right? When it comes to new music, the next step is to open your arms to what's being written in your time, not the music of 50 years ago or even 40 years ago or 35 years ago, but how about the music that was delivered to someone's desk last month? And so those are part and parcel of each other. And so part of it with some ensembles is not only getting them to open their ideas to composers from diverse backgrounds, but to open their ideas and their programming to music of their time, new music. Bartok is not new music, folks. It's like sometimes they still act. Stravinsky, I mean Schoenberg, they still act like that's modern music. I mean, come on, folks, do the math. Over 100 years ago. So we're trying to push on different fronts at the same time, and it will happen at some point. We won't be having these conversations anymore. I'm quite hopeful. I think the whole point is, and you know this, and I want to hear your experiences too. I'm going to shut up and let you talk about this from your flute perspective as women, because the whole point is to normalize it, which means that the more of us out there doing our work and just doing what we do, the more that becomes the normal thing. And at some point, people aren't going to have to point out that Alex Shapiro is a female, not a male. It's not even going to matter one way or the other. I mean, it doesn't matter now, frankly. But what's your perspective on it? I mean, like, especially in the flute world, but in any world as a musician.
I think it's kind of funny. I mean, in the flute world, it's pretty heavily biased towards women, so
Yes.
gender-wise,
Yeah.
it's less of an issue. I think if we were to break the flute community up into various other demographics, there are definitely some areas for improvement. But as a performer, I don't know, it's something that's been on my mind off and on over the last couple of years. I've talked to Nicole about this. Women in academia, in music in particular, still seem to be fewer and further between. I started a new job in August of 2022, and there are not very many full-time women in my department. And it wasn't until I started talking about that with some of my other women friends who are also academics that I realized that it's something that a lot of them have been dealing with for over a decade. So it's like in some aspects of my life, it feels like everything is moving in the right direction. And in others, it's like, wow, not that much is that different from the 70s
Yeah.
or the 80s or even parts of the 90s.
Is that because of time off for childbearing, things like that? Or what is it, what do you think it's due to? That, is there an interruption in women's lives that where they decide to take a little bit of a break and then come back and then they're not as high up on the tenure ladder or something?
I
Man,
genuinely don't have any idea. I mean, existing now in a more male than not male space, I have a lot more respect for the women who came before me. It's
Yeah.
harder than I would ever have thought that it was, even though all of the men that I work with are lovely, wonderful humans. It's still just really weird to walk into a room and know that you're the only one like you that's
Yep.
in that room. So and I say this knowing that there are many other people who have it far worse than I do, but it gives you, it has given me at least a new perspective in how challenging it must have been for like the one full professor
Right.
in my department who is a woman, was probably the only woman for the first half of her career, and how strange that must have been, even if everyone was being well behaved and you know the patriarchy and misogyny weren't a thing. It's odd. I have no idea why it is, but I think being a trailblazer in your demographic is harder than you would think. And so that probably makes it trickier. And then, like you said, reproductive issues,
Yeah. I mean, I bring that
salary
up
issues.
because
Yeah.
it tends to be, again, we're back to the mammal thing, folks. Just there's nothing wrong with this. Women, mothers, new mothers tend to, need to, want to, whatever you want to say, spend more time with their infants maybe than men have to. And not that the men don't love their new babies just as much, and not that there aren't men out there who do completely take over, the early onset child rearing from infancy, toddlerhood, all that. I'm not saying that there aren't plenty of men like that, but the reality is that it falls mostly on the women for obvious natural reasons. And I think one of the problems that I've observed is we seem to be penalized for that. All of a sudden you have a baby, maybe two, maybe three, and that means you want to spend time with your family. You want to have actually a life work balance. It doesn't make you any less of a flutist or a composer or a conductor or anything else. It just means, I'm going to take off a little time to this priority, which is called a human being that has now popped out of my body that I am responsible for. And I want to take some time to care for this human being, which I always say to my composer friends is about the most creative thing you can possibly do. Forget about making a piece of music. How about making a person? You are making a person. That's amazing. And I feel like some systems still, many systems in our society, not just academia, but, it's a long list, really discriminate against that, including in subtle ways. Sometimes it's not so open. It's not like saying, no, we won't allow you to do this. It's more like you're passed over for opportunities if you're not 100% present every moment of the day. And so I think sometimes women of childbearing age are, they find themselves behind because they chose, I think wisely, to take a little time to balance their work and still do gigs and still do teaching privately and do whatever they want, but maybe not be on a treadmill of a schedule that is, an external schedule. And it's got to be very, very frustrating. Composers, I mean, I certainly know female composers who have never had children, like me, by the way, I have no children. But I also know female composers who have had children and have had a lot of challenges of balancing. Many of them, interestingly, are in, I think, the most difficult part of our business, which is the film music business. Because with film music, TV music, any media music, you're looking at crushing deadlines that are just inhuman to begin with. Even if you lived alone in a hut, with just electricity in your studio and decided not to sleep, to deliver 80 minutes of music in a matter of weeks is crazy. And so the schedules, I think, in the media world are inhuman for anybody. And then if you toss in having a family to that, it's very, very challenging. Really, really hard. I know some women who actually didn't even want people in their field to know that they either had children or were pregnant, because they felt that that would be held against them and they wouldn't get a gig. Now that's terrible. That is absolutely terrible. And that's real. I know more than one person who said that to me, and that's awful. So yeah, we're dealing. So that's why I bring up the female part on a biological level, because I have observed that that's an issue.
I think that's probably not limited to the composer world,
No, not at all.
unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth and I can both think of some flutists who might fit that category of trying to keep the family as hush hush as possible. You are really, Alex, have you read Kat Bohannon's Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution?
No, I should read that.
You should. Yeah, I just finished it not long ago. but you are really channeling that book. It's fascinating. It's a great book.
Send
But
me, yeah, send me a follow-up email with the link. I would love to
I
read it.
will,
Yeah.
and I'll put it in the show notes for everybody else too. Yeah, I mean, it is written by an evolutionary biologist, but she manages to sprinkle in some sociology too. I'm just
Yeah.
that understanding that your biological capabilities do end up dictating how your adult life goes if you
Yeah.
make certain choices. And it's
Absolutely.
interesting. I don't know. Elizabeth and I were part of a conversation that was very meaningful and surprising to me, that has really stuck with me. So I'm curious to see what you think of my retelling of this, Elizabeth. But we were with three other flutists, all, you know, in varying ages between, I guess, early 30s to mid 40s, as me, I was the oldest one, I'm pretty sure. And one of the people at the table, we had been playing some chamber music together. One of the people at the table at lunch said, "Oh, do you guys have kids, or are you going to have kids?" And it was interesting because I didn't know any but Elizabeth all that well. So I knew Elizabeth's answer to that question. I didn't know what anyone else was going to say. And so I was like, rapt attention. Oh, you know, I'm about to learn something big about all these people. And with the exception of the woman who asked the question, who is now a mom, everybody else had a different version of hell no.
Wow.
And you know, we had, like, my hell no was very simple. I'm not a fan of babies and toddlers, and I'm uncomfortable around them, so I never wanted to make any and take them home, you know. I think that's the absolute simplest answer. Cats for me as well. But there were other variations of that answer, like, well, this is how long it took me to get a tenure track job, and now I'm in my 40s, so, you know. And somebody else said, "Oh, well, I was raised by a single mom, and I saw how hard it was for her, and I don't want that for myself." And everybody had different reasons for coming to that no, and they all had to do, except for just my weenie discomfort with little kids, everybody else's had to do with making difficult decisions because they knew what hardships were coming if they did that.
Wow. Wow. That is really sad to hear, you know,
Yeah,
because
it
how
was
many men,
profound.
if you ask the men, if there was a table of men, I assume these were all women at the table.
Yep.
And if it
All
was a
women.
table of men and some guy who was about to have a baby asked the same question, I mean, this is the stuff of a book right here. It would be fascinating. Get a table of women talking about this and all the different reasons for no. Or yeses. Yeses are good too, but we want both. But the no's are very telling. And then get a table of the men and listen to what their reasoning is or isn't. Fascinating. Some of it will overlap and some of it won't.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. And, you know, again, I'm like you. My reason is I just literally, regardless of my career, I could be, you know, a dunce, you know, sitting on a rock my whole life doing nothing. I still wouldn't want to have kids. I just was one of those people who didn't get the DNA dollop of wanting to be a mom. That's just not me. I knew that from the time I was, you know, a kid. I knew I didn't want to be a mother. So again, it had nothing to do with career choices. And as you also aptly say, it makes it really easy. It's a very simple, cut and dry answer. It has nothing to do with any decision making or angst or Sturm und Drang about, you know, making choices that are just ridiculous choices to have to make at all. And it tells you, regarding the other women's answers, just how messed up our society is. That we cannot have a society that manages, or a US society. I'm not going to speak to other countries because other countries do get it right in some places. But in the US, we get it wrong an awful lot of the time. We very rarely are able to give human beings, whether they're male or female, by the way, you know, human beings who want to balance their life with their kick-ass careers. We rarely give them a path and options to be able to do that readily and easily and with some support. And at the end of the day, you know, when you're 90 years old and, you know, getting toward the last years of your life, what are you going to remember about all this, you know, about the choices that you made, et cetera? I mean, this is heavy stuff, and our society is so ill-designed for being human. We're so about ambition, and we're so about careers, and we're so about success, and we're not about being human along with that. It shouldn't be either or. Wow.
Well, such a
I would
wonderful
love to
point.
see a set of interviews. I mean, you could do this on your podcast or a book or something, a dissertation on this subject of asking a whole bunch of people, children, no children, why, you know?
Mm.
Wow.
I do think it's relevant that most of the people that were at that table were working professional
Yeah,
musicians, and most of them working at least part-time, if not full-time, in academia. And
yeah, and the academia thing, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I spend a little bit too much time on social media, and there are a number of rabbit holes you can go down that talk about how academia is perfectly set up for a person with a spouse who does not work. And I often wonder if that plays into it a little
Yeah,
bit.
it's very true. So here's the question, and I know you have a million answers to this, but how do things continue to change to flip that scenario and make it stop, to change what the normalcy is in, let's just start with academia, of which I'm not a part. I'm just the grandparent who visits. But that's another thing, by the way, I never wanted to do. I never wanted to have kids, and I always knew I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to be on faculty. I always knew I had this sixth sense that I would get to a place in my career where I would be invited to, get to talk to tons and tons of students and visit, universities and all that, and do all the fun stuff that I do for many years now without having to be on faculty. So I am in rarefied air, very much so, because I don't have to deal with the bureaucracy or the bullshit. Our first curse word, folks. We don't have to deal with the bullshit of other people, defining rules for us, because someone like me gets to make her own rules 24/7. And that's a very privileged thing to be able to say. So what is, for you, the two of you, what is our action plan if to all the people listening, and to me, through my channels of being able to help too, what do we do? How do you change this? How do you fix the machine?
I'm pausing awkwardly because I've heard Nicole say a lot of things about the machine.
Mhm.
Well, that was just me bitching about it, I think, though. I don't know.
Oh, bitch away.
I
Really?
do. I mean, I suppose I've been reminded of a while now of a conversation that I had multiple times with a colleague of mine, a male colleague, well-meaning, good, the stereotypical good guy, wants to be an advocate, wants to be, considerate, and he is, but he has to be led there all the time. And I think he's about as good as it gets. He genuinely wants to be an advocate
But the
for.
fact that he has to be led there, that's
Yes.
sad. I mean,
And
really.
and well, and I think there's probably a lot of that. I think there are probably a lot of them in our world. There have been so many times over the years when I would, and he's always been in a leadership position over me for the 17 years that I've been at UW. And there are so many times when I would say to him, because I felt safe doing so, I'm concerned about this thing that this person said or did. I'm afraid it's going to open me up to abuse, or I'm afraid it's going to open this person up to abuse, or, many of our more unprotected classes, the adjuncts, the term positions in our school, I think most schools are female. And I would say, oh, when this other male tenured colleague said this, I got my hackles up. It felt like a red flag. And I think we need to be careful that that person isn't disrespecting, blah. And this person, this well-meaning colleague, genuinely would say, well, I haven't experienced that as a problem with him. So
Oh, God.
it's
Oh,
fine.
oh.
I know. And then, like over the years, I mean, when I was younger, the first couple of times I would get a reaction like that from him, I would just want give him a really tight hug around the neck. But he's also my friend, and we played a lot of music together at one point, and I learned to say, okay, but here's my experience, here's where I'm coming from. If he hadn't been in an uncomfortable position like one that I was talking about, it just wasn't real to him because he
Wow.
hadn't experienced it himself. And I think he's
Yeah.
gotten better over the years with that. But I think that's always a part of, I mean, when you are white and straight and male, there are just so many times you don't feel discomfort or difficulty in your
Right.
early years.
You have no idea. I always call it swimming in water that's the same temperature as your body. You have no idea you're even
Yeah.
in water. You're completely unaware. I mean, now, like I feel as you say this, I'm channeling the rage of every young Black man in America, right? Who, is trying to say our experience as young Black men in this country is so off the charts different from your experience as white people, being able, male or female, frankly, being able to glide through every situation. This is like the same thing. And again, and here you're talking about someone who's a kind person, who's well-meaning, who probably would never think that they're, actively discriminatory or worse or anything. And I'm sure they're not. But again, that's a situation, and you're already doing it, where it's up to us to point out lovingly and kindly, but to point out, you know what, take a step back, take a beat. I need you to understand. I need you to put yourself in the shoes of someone like me or whoever the person is, and make them live it for a second. I mean, I had this conversation with a guy about just what one time, and I'm sure there are memes about this, I'm sure, on Facebook or whatever, about when a woman in the city, I grew up in the city in Manhattan, and when a woman in a city goes out on the street, there's a whole checklist of things we have together, right? To make sure that we are safe, to make sure that we are okay, to make sure we're aware of our surroundings, or if we're in a parking lot or a parking structure or whatever, any kind of potential, we even think about it as being potentially a dangerous or threatening place. Because why? Statistically, we tend to be smaller. I happen to be more small than some, but we tend to be smaller. We tend to be easier targets, et cetera, et cetera. And I've said to male friends, you guys, it never even occurs to you when you get out of your car to look around you. It never occurs to you when you're walking to your car in a parking lot to look around you, or when you're walking down a street. It never occurs to you. There's so many things you don't have to think about as a man. And there's a very long list of them, right? And it's like that. It's like they don't even get it. They don't, and it's not their fault, because why should they? They don't have to live that way. But what they do have to do, and I think what our job is to learn what it's like for other people. And that's why I'm always encouraging all of us to, in a very kind way, you don't have to be an asshole about it, but in a kind way, point out to people what the other realities are, so that they can at least be, they can't be empathetic, but they can be sympathetic, and they can be aware of it. And then they become our allies. Once you make somebody aware of something, they see it differently. And it's great. I remember I was at a CBDNA regional a few years ago, not that long ago. I think it was in Tacoma. And I remember it was me, one other female composer, and one Black conductor and one Asian conductor, and everybody else was white men. Fine. Actually, oh no, excuse me. There were a couple other, 2, 3, 4 other female conductors as well. But it was very white male heavy. And interestingly, the Asian conductor, a wonderful guy, Korean American named Travis Cross, he stood up, and we were having a really good conversation. It was one of these really great powwows that they put together where everybody just kind of talks about stuff. And he stood up in the room. It was a seminar kind of scenario. It was formal. And he said, raise your hand if when you walked into this room, you immediately noticed who looked like you. Think about that. So me and like 3 other people, right? The Black conductor, the female composer, me, him, like 4 or 5 of us out of a room of 100 people, whatever it was, we raised our hands. And you know what? I think that must have made an impression on the very lovely white conductors in that room. They're all wonderful people. I mean, I work with them all. They're terrific. Many of them have been the most supportive people that have created my career, really, by playing my music. I mean, I am indebted and grateful. But being white and male gives you a privilege and a blind spot, in our society, that it's not their fault, but they just often don't have it. And I think that people must have taken note when like just a handful of us raised our hands, because of course we're keenly aware when we walk into a room who looks like us, because almost nobody does, right? Well, not in a flute convention, obviously, that all bets are off for women in a flute convention. But let's talk about conducting and composing, right? Or frankly, when I was at this June, I went to a low brass convention. It was great. ITEC, the tuba and euphonium. Yeah, because they were doing a premiere of mine, and one of my pieces was a competition piece, a virtuoso, the virtuoso soloist or whatever they call it. So I had a fun reason to be there. And I had a fantastic time. I was expecting, as I joked with my friends, to just be the belle of the brass balls there, meaning I didn't think I would find a whole lot of other women there, but I was delighted. There were a lot of women, euphonium and tuba players there. It was great. It wasn't 50-50, but there were a lot of them. And that was terrific to see. And I know that iTech, especially at that particular conference, which was hosted by Arizona State University, at which Deanna is the chair of the trombone studio there, or
Right.
tuba studio, excuse me.
Yeah, tuba. Yeah.
Tuba, right.
She's great.
And so she made a real point of it being a DEI aware event. And it really was. And they must have made a real effort also to reach out to women around the country saying, you need to come to this. And they did. And there were like 800 people at this thing. I don't know, it was big. And that was such a nice surprise to see that, because I really was expecting to be just in a sea of men. Not, I mean, it wouldn't have mattered to me one way or the other, but it was much nicer to see much more equity. So.
That's a great example, actually. And do you know what iTech used to be called? Like even in 99, when I first started dating my now husband, who's a tuba player, TUBA.
Yeah, that's right.
It
was the Brotherhood.
Brotherhood.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's right. And then they changed it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is, yeah, I think, I mean, you are an advocate in so many ways, Alex, and I think what you're talking about is all of us taking, putting some energy into being advocates just in our personal lives, because so as you point out, so many people are receptive, but they have that blind spot because they just haven't experienced that discomfort themselves, but they want to be educated.
I think we can empower our students, by the way, with this. Every time I do a gazillion Zooms with students, with high school and university, and I am constantly saying two things, very different things to them. One, in the context, I'm always telling them they can all be composers. Like, hey, you're musicians. There's no reason why you can't compose. I say that to the two of you too. So there's that. But I also tell them the power that they have to change the world around them. And it starts with the conversations they have. And it starts with being kind and gracious and open, not attacking people, but instead bringing them into a conversation. I say, if you attack somebody that you think is doing the wrong thing, guess what? They're a mammal. They're going to respond by recoiling. That's how we respond to attacks. But if you bring them in under the tent, if you make them your co-conspirator, if you make them your friend, if you bring up gently things that you're observing that maybe they'd like to be a little more aware of, all of a sudden they want to do better, and they're your friend, and they feel that they're safe with you, that you're not attacking them, you're just trying to help things go better, right? So I think I interrupted you, and I apologize, Nicole, but I'm always telling students, and I think because the two of you are teaching, this is the power we have to say to students that your voice starts now. There's no such thing as being too young to have a voice, or too young to be an advocate or an activist.
That was beautiful. But I'm gonna say something I never say, and Elizabeth's gonna fall out of her chair. I think this is something good that social media has brought to the fore.
Yeah.
I very rarely say anything good about social media. But it's been a platform for people to share their experiences and try to help
absolutely, and to learn what's
talent
out there, like what I said before about crowdsourcing. When people ask, hey, I'm looking for, they take the initiative to say, I'm looking for a fanfare by a Black composer. It should be 3 minutes. It needs to have a lot of trombones or whatever, and whatever. And so everybody piles on with great recommendations that all of the people reading the thread didn't know about these pieces either, right? And so boom, all of a sudden information has been spread in the most constructive way. That's how my programming resources page was born, by the way. I kept seeing so many requests for the same kinds of things over and over again, to the point where I had a little template that I would often copy and paste in, of like 4 links, basic links for people to check out of different things, like ICD, the Institute for Composer Diversity, and WindRep, the Wind Repertory Project, which has a really good database, and all of that stuff, so they could find people. And then it finally got to be like so much that I decided, well, I have my own web server. I do all my own website programming. I'm a total geek. I can set up a page, an aggregated set of links, to external links, to guide people to find a gazillion resources if they have the time and energy to sit there with a glass of wine or something one night and go, plodding through these websites and look at things. And then I used it, of course, as a bully pulpit too. And so I have a little, a lot of my own thoughts on there too, that I welcome people to copy and paste if they find any of it useful for their talking spiels, because it gets back to, all of us have to be talking about this. We can't be silent. But that social media, absolutely. This is like the best part of social media, is getting people dialed in and giving them information and then cheering them on when they're doing great stuff, as I think we all do. That's another thing. I mean, I have I'm at the Facebook limit, as they say, of friends. But I very much curate my friends. Like my attitude toward anybody who's going to be my Facebook friend is that they have to be someone I would want to invite into my house to have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. And I mean, that separates the wheat from the chaff right there. And I do take the time to check people out. Or if I don't know somebody and then suddenly I see stuff on my news feed from them that is not acceptable for one reason or another, bye-bye. They get the airlock. Bye-bye. Because life is too short. I don't have to be everybody's friend, or they don't need to be my friend. But I find that what that has done, and for all of us, I always say that you can choose and curate your social media existence, and you can choose to only surround yourself with really good people and content on your newsfeed. There is almost nothing negative or bullshit on my newsfeed. Some of it's more interesting than others, but I have a really cheery, upbeat, positive newsfeed because of the people that I have surrounded myself with there. So I always want to encourage people who are skeptical about social media, saying sometimes we have bad experiences with it, because if you just, don't take the time to check people out or curate it or allow people who are jerks, to still populate your newsfeed, yeah, then that's going to suck. But you have actually a lot of control. We have a lot of control over it.
True. Yeah, sage advice. I think early on I did too much people pleasing. Oh, this person sent me a friend request. I don't want to reject them.
Yeah. I'm people
But
offending all
now,
the time. I'm like, screw you, you're not gonna be my friend. This is a great thing, by the way, about age. We haven't even gotten to the aging women thing. But the great thing about age, as I will be 62 in 3 days, is that 2 days? I'm losing count. But the great thing about age, it's true. And now comes the next big swear word that we all say, and it's really true. You have no more fucks left to give. You have gotten to a certain point in your life and you're proud of it. And you figure, you know what am I being so polite for and not speaking my mind? It doesn't mean I have to be an asshole and be offensive to anybody, but I certainly don't have to hold back. I certainly don't have to please anybody. The only person I need to please is me, while being a good person to other people. But I'm only interested in holding myself up to my own standard. So that is a very freeing post-menopausal thing in general. I think it really starts in your 50s. It does. I mean, many women, I don't know what your take on this is, but many women will say there was something really freeing about entering our 50s.
Yeah, I'm getting there, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm trying not to live in the world of regret, because that's useless. But for anybody in their 20s and 30s listening, just do it now. You don't have to wait until menopause
Right. Thank
to
you.
start realizing that trying to please everybody isn't doing what you think it is anyway.
Bingo. When, we look back on our past relationships or work experiences or whatever. And if we knew then what we know now, we would have made some very different choices. That wise words, Nicole, that is so great. Don't wait till you are 62 to have no more fucks to give. Okay. You can start sooner, folks.
And you can be a good person without being a good
Yes,
man.
exactly.
I feel like I had that advice and those examples around me and the older women in my family, but I still resisted for longer than I wish I had. So
yeah. I mean, I think the reason that tends to happen is because it is part of the learning process. Like you don't get to be at this point in your life without having bumped your heads into a lot of walls and had some painful experiences and disappointments and regrets and things that you wish you had done differently. I mean, that's part of what it is to grow up and to become an adult. And I mean, I'm a slow learner. I don't think I really became an adult till I was like 50. I think my last, 12 years have been my best years by far. But I think it's this weird thing of when we're young, we're getting mixed messages, because on one hand, we do know if we're doing it right, we have to have a lot of experiences. We have to do everything and try everything and be open to everything. And that's how you find yourself, to know what you don't want as well as what you do want. But that, of course, can be perilous, you know, as we all know, that can be perilous, that all that bumping around. You just hope to survive it, I suppose.
Yeah.
And bring out the best in others. Do everything you can to bring out the best in other people and help other people. Yeah. Because that only makes your life more beautiful. You know, it's have an attitude of abundance, not scarcity. These are the things I wish they had courses in school.
And these are, yes, these are very challenging to the way that I think many of us feel in our 20s and 30s trying to make it as musicians. You know,
Yeah.
it's especially that idea of abundance instead of scarcity. Oh boy, that's
Well, think of how your
tough
world
one.
as performers is set up. It's so awful. It's the opposite of art. It's competition, especially as flutists, because everybody throw a rock and you hit a flutist, right? I mean, there's a lot of flutists, and a lot of them are very good. You know, it's just you're set up for disaster emotionally in the art scene in pretty much any field. By the way, I've written a lot about composer competitions. By the way, that's one of my big pet peeves, much to the chagrin of a few people. But it's sort of my crusade. And it is so true, of course, with soloists and with musicians or orchestral players and auditions and teaching positions and all of this. Everything is competitive. And that's the anathema of what it is to make art. Art is unique to the individual. It shouldn't be competitive at all. It's what do you, with your fingerprint of of being a human being, have to say through the wind that blows through your instrument, which comes from you. You know, that's all it is. And yet it's turned into this ugly thing. And I feel for you. I really do, as players, because the competition is terrible.
I mean, it's terrible, but I think just like you have both described being at a certain point and deciding there were no fucks left to give, I think there's got to be a moment like that as a performer, at least, where you decide, you know, this is the system that I exist in, and you can use aspects of that system as a tool. I mean, I don't want to get into like a deep philosophical debate about the merits of competitions or not competitions, but you know, I found myself in a place where I had a little bit more mental space in a job than I had had in recent years, and I started doing a handful of competitions. Nicole and I talked about this on the podcast about this time last year, and I'm not necessarily winning them, and that's not really the point. It's a tool because it's a deadline and a goal to set for myself, and I feel if you go about it with a holistic mentality and use it as a yardstick against yourself and not necessarily against all of the other flutists or composers or who the heck ever is entering. I don't know. I think it can be a double-edged sword.
I think that's really well put. That's excellent if you use it, you know, as a guideline for yourself and your own progress, as opposed to external judgment. I think that's brilliant. That's
Yeah.
definitely a great way to look at it.
Well, and I don't know if I would have been able to do that as a younger person. So I think like you, I discourage some of my younger students or my more fragile students from participating in things where they're gonna feel like they have to be measured and judged, because that's not good for anybody's self-esteem. But I think if you can find yourself in a time or place where you feel you know who you are and you know what you want, the system, as flawed and imperfect as it is, I hope can still be used to grow and improve yourself as an artist or a creator. You just have to be really self-aware of how you're using that system and how you're responding to your use of that system.
Really well put. That is very wise words. Being self-aware. Like, for instance, someone like me, I grew up in a household where I was harshly criticized all the time. And I think that is why I'm sure I am personally triggered by competition. Like I won't participate, because the idea of having to be criticized or rejected is just so deeply painful to me, having grown up that way, that I don't want to sign up for that voluntarily. Like, that's not my idea of a good time. So I protect myself. I'm just not that kind of a masochist. So, but also because of the nature of my work, I don't have to. Like
Sure.
composers, a lot of academic composers are under the absolute misguidance, misbelief, myth that they think somehow that they have to enter competitions in order to have a career. That's crazy. I don't know where they got that from, except other academicians. But since I'm completely out of the academia system, I can tell you firsthand, you don't have to have any fancy schmancy awards to make a good living as a composer. All you have to do is put notes together that actually people want to listen to. It's really it, and that are playable by flutists like you. You know, we don't want to maim our players. We want to give them interesting things to do, but we don't want to kill them. And it's a pretty simple guideline, really. But awards are not part of it. And so I think I was really lucky that since I had that very strong reaction to not wanting to be judged by other people except myself. I judge myself a lot. I think I'm in the right profession for that. I think it would be hard if I were a player. And as you say, really wisely, it's a necessity of the business in many instances. And the trick is to change your state of mind about it, or put yourself in the correct state of mind about it so that you're having a positive experience regardless of the outcome. And that's really great.
Well, I mean, I think one of the key points of privilege that I'm realizing as you're talking is I don't have to win a competition to get a job. I have a job, so my
Right.
dogs are fed regardless. And
Yeah.
I think it's a lot easier to give fewer fucks when
Yeah.
your basic needs are taken care of.
100%.
And you're going to continue to write and be commissioned regardless
Right.
of whether you participate in the competition machine. I'm going to continue to teach flute lessons tomorrow, regardless of whether I complete a competition tape or
Yeah.
not. And so we're coming at it from maybe a different place than somebody who's
Absolutely.
up
I'm
and
really
coming.
glad. Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that is a big, big, big footnote to the other stuff we've been saying, that I've been saying. No more fucks to give. Well, yeah, if you are lucky enough to be in the privileged position, which has to do with age and experience and other things as well, all the way down to economics and having a roof over your head and dog food in the bowl. So those are big, big realities. And when you're younger, you don't have all that stuff lined up, most likely. And so that's another reason why you have to, try a lot of things and bang your head against walls and do things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily want to do when you were 50, but you do them when you're 25. So it's all a lot of nuance. It's all gray area. I think one of my big pet peeves, I have so many, but one of my pet peeves is with the kids today. The younger people often tend to see things in very black and white ways. And God bless them for having very strong opinions about things and wanting things to be right. But the reality about the world is that it's mostly gray area. Even the most black and white things are largely tinged by gray in some way. And that one of the things about being a functioning adult and a functioning human on the planet and in our country and a citizen, whether in music or in the world, is to understand nuance, right? And to understand the context, that it's not just, you can't just vilify somebody for saying one thing and then, they're awful. It's like, how about context, folks? How about looking at, a bigger picture? And you're laughing, you're smiling about this because I can see you're like, you've been down this road. But what I wish for everybody of any age, but especially some of the younger people coming up, is that they really make an effort to understand context and gray area. Most of life, and certainly all of art, is gray area. There's very little black and white.
As you were talking, I was just thinking about a moment where in my life recently, I had a privilege check moment where I was, thinking I was a pretty good ally to a population that I did not belong to. And a good friend pointed out that I had a blind spot I didn't know about.
Mhm.
And so for several weeks, month or two after, I was like, oh my God, I might be the worst human being alive, but it's just part of growing and evolving and learning to be better, I guess. So
Were
uh,
they correct in their assumption or in their assessment, or were they too harsh?
oh no, I think they were very accurate.
Okay. Okay, good.
I have a very close friend who was a black man in academia, and in my naivete, I thought there's not that much of a difference between the experience
Women.
of a woman and,
Right,
you know,
right.
another minority group. And
Mm.
I learned pretty quickly from watching him interact with other people that he had a whole different set of issues. And, you know, over the course of our friendship, I learned some things and he made some comments about gender. And I was like, buddy, I don't know. I mean, so I think we learned from each
You
other
learn from each other
and
because he
continue to
got a
do so.
perspective from you, you got a perspective from him, and you know, you're both dealing with it.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. He's got another layer of it just because of pigmentation.
Different
And
layer.
yeah.
Yeah. But it was a moment where I said
Yeah.
something without thinking and he was
Yeah.
like, "You might want to check that." And
Yeah.
I went home and was like, "Oh God, I might. Yeah, you're right." So even the best, and like Nicole was saying earlier, even colleagues with the best intentions,
Sure.
you know, if you haven't walked in those shoes, you're
Absolutely.
not going to know
None of
where
us
the
are
pitfalls are.
None of us are perfect, and we're always learning again from our friends. I would imagine this made your friendship with him even stronger, you know, to
I hope
have this
so.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why we have friends, is it's their job to bring things to our attention. We can't possibly be aware of everything or know everything. We constantly want to do better and learn. I can see how that was an uncomfortable moment, but I think that, you know, it's a beautiful example of how we don't, there's no matter how huge our hearts are, there is no way for us to walk, as you say, to walk in everybody's shoes all the time. We can't. Just have to be careful and just always, and I just always acknowledge, you know, what we don't know. It's very hard.
I love
I bet he loves you even more now
oh,
because you've had that conversation, and you him, you know.
Elizabeth's pretty lovable.
What were you
Yeah.
about to say, Nicole?
Well, I mean, we've just come full circle because we've come back to that role of helping educate our friends and
Right.
being an advocate, small a advocate in our lives. That's
Small
beautiful.
A advocate, that's what it's
Yeah.
about. And it starts locally with friendships, with our relationships with younger people, with colleagues, with everybody. I mean, I think the whole point is like the whole point of this podcast, to have the conversation, right? To just speak openly about things that might even be uncomfortable moments or uncomfortable issues. And just say, let it fly. Let people disagree. Maybe they write in and say, you know what, that Alex woman, Jesus Christ, what the hell was she talking about? You know, fine. You know, that's the point, is to have these frank conversations and let it roll. And the fun thing about conversations also on podcasts or over dinner, you know, with friends, is you throw things up against the wall to kind of see what's going to stick, because sometimes we can't learn more or learn what we think until we enunciate it. In other words, it helps to talk things out and have these, you know, dialogues, and they're dynamic and they're interesting. And not everything that you say you're necessarily going to completely agree with, but being able to say it puts it out there for you to look at it more closely. So it's an exercise. It's a really fun exercise.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.